This is True Crime Out Loud.
I'm your host, B.
And I'm your host, Jen. Next week, we're going to be creating a special episode of our outtakes and bloopers. I have been saving them up for a full year, and you are not going to want to miss those. And then we're going to take a little time off, and we'll be back in January with a very special multi-part episode on the most requested case that we have had. And we will tell you more about that next week during the blooper episode.
And this week's case takes us to Germanton, North Carolina, with a population of 827. It gets its name from the original settlement in 1790 by German immigrants, and it's located about 15 to 20 minutes north of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And residing in this very small town in North Carolina is Charlie Lawson, a 43-year-old tobacco farmer, and his wife, Fanny Lawson, who was 38. They were married in 1911. They moved to Germanton around 1918 and were tobacco sharecroppers at that time. They were very hard workers and saved their money, and by 1927 they were able to buy their own farm located on Brook Cove Road, which was located near the farm of Charlie's brother. Charlie and Fanny had 8 children, although one of them had died at 6 years old from pneumonia. In 1929, Charlie, Fanny, and their remaining 7 children lived together in their farmhouse. Their oldest child was Marie, she was 17, Arthur, who was 16, Carrie Lee, who was 12, Maybelle, who was 7, and Mary Lou, who was the baby at 4 months. The farmhouse that the Lawsons had purchased was old and in need of repair. Charlie, Fanny, Marie, and Arthur, the 2 oldest kids, worked together in the evenings, and when they were not farming, they were fixing up the farmhouse. During this work, Charlie accidentally struck himself in the head with an axe while he was trying to remove some rotten wood from the structure. A few weeks before Christmas in 1929, Charlie loaded up the large family and drove them to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is about 13 miles away. He bought the entire family new clothes, and they went to a photography studio where they had a family photo made. Charlie told the family that this was part of their, quote, Christmas surprise.
The case took place on December 25th, 1929. There was more snowfall that Christmas than usual, and it was colder than usual. Charlie's brother, Elijah, and 2 of his sons went to the Lawson home on the afternoon of Christmas Day, and they found a horror. The rooms in the home were soaked in blood. Furniture and items in the home were just in a mess. They found Fanny, the mom, dead on the front porch with a wound of some type to her chest. Inside, they found 17-year-old Marie, who was dead near the fireplace, also with a wound to her chest. Then they found 4-year-old James, 2-year-old Raymond, and 4-month-old Mary Lou, all covered in blood and deceased. Each victim in the home had a pillow under their head with their hands folded across their chest. They then found 12-year-old Carrie and 7-year-old Maybelle in the tobacco barn, and they were covered in blood. Placed under their heads instead of pillows were rocks, kind of as a head prop, and their arms were folded across their chests. So this said the killer obviously cared for the victims. What they did not find was Charlie or 16-year-old Arthur. So the police arrive, and the family, friends, and police begin to look for Arthur and Charlie. Well, they locate Arthur. He was in Walnut Cove, where he had gone with a friend to buy ammo for rabbit hunting. Now, some reports say Charlie gave him permission to go get ammo, and other reports say Charlie actually sent him on this errand. So the police, family, and friends searched for Charlie, but they couldn't find him. After about 4 hours passed at the scene, and just before sunset, they all heard a gunshot from the woods not too far from the home. They heard the howls of Charlie's 2 beagles, and it led the police straight to the body of Charlie, who had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So the police start looking into the details of the crime and exactly what happened. What they discover is 12-year-old Carrie and 6-year-old Maybelle were going to walk to visit an aunt and uncle who lived close by, but Charlie was waiting on them near the barn. He shot both of the girls, and then he used the handle of a hoe to beat them. He then dragged them into the barn where he posed their bodies. He then walked to the front porch and shot his wife, Fanny, in the chest. He put 2 more shotgun shells into his gun, opened the front door, and shot his daughter, Marie, in the chest, and she was found lying on the floor near the fireplace. He then beat 4-year-old James, 2-year-old Raymond, and 4-month-old Mary Lou. Charlie then walked off into the woods with his beagles, Sam and Queen, following behind him along with 2 shotguns. The melted snow around the tree where Charlie was found showed that he had paced in a circle around that tree, possibly for hours. Charlie then leaned against the tree and used a stick to push the trigger of his 12-gauge shotgun, killing himself. There were 2 notes in his pockets that had been written on tobacco auction receipts. One read, "Trouble can cause." The other note read, "Nobody to blame." News reports from the time read, "Crazed farmer kills wife and 6 children." They say he became suddenly insane, and some say it was ascribed to a blow on the head a year ago, referring to the incident where he hit himself with an axe. It was thought that Charlie killed his family while Arthur was away because he feared that Arthur would try to intervene and be able to stop Charlie. On the day of the crime, due to the snow and the steep hill to the Lawson farm, it wasn't easy to remove the victims from the home. Family, friends, and the police worked together by using sheets to carry the victims to a makeshift sled in order to get them to the hearses that were waiting at the main road. The bodies were first taken to Walnut Cove Funeral Home, but they quickly realized it was going to be too small to do autopsies and do the embalming process, so they loaded back up all of the victims and took them to Madison to Yelton Funeral Parlor. Yelton Funeral Parlor was located above Penn Hardware Company on Murphy Street. The autopsies were performed on the night of December 25th by Dr. C.J. Helsebeck, who was the Stokes County coroner. He was assisted by Dr. Spotswood Taylor, and Dr. Taylor was home visiting family for Christmas. He was actually an intern at Johns Hopkins Medical Center in Baltimore, Maryland, and he was also the brother to Stokes County Sheriff John Taylor. During the autopsies, they removed Charlie's brain, and it was initially reported that his brain was relatively small and a portion of the center seemed underdeveloped. Dr. Taylor ended up taking the brain back to Johns Hopkins with him. So on December 27th, 1929, the family was buried in a mass grave dug by friends and family. But there were only 7 caskets for the 8 family members. One of the caskets held Fanny, where she had 4-month-old Mary Lou in her arms. Charlie was buried in the same grave with the family he had murdered.
Obviously, a horrible story that took place on Christmas and left people wondering why. People did note that Charlie had been behaving erratically in the weeks and months before the murders, and they had noticed a change in his personality after the accident a few months before, where he had struck himself in the head with the axe while he was working on his home, as I had mentioned. So Charlie had actually complained to his doctor about severe headaches and insomnia. And as Jen mentioned, Dr. Taylor had taken Charlie's brain back to Johns Hopkins and they did an examination on it and there was no abnormalities. And in fact, the current location of his brain is unknown. Another theory in the case is that some family members and friends had said that Charlie had been sexually abusing his 17-year-old daughter Marie and that she was in fact pregnant with his child. Fanny had told some close family members in confidence that she was concerned about Charlie and Marie's relationship, and this conversation supposedly took place a year before Charlie committed these murders. A friend of Marie, Ella May, said Marie had told her a few weeks before Christmas that she was pregnant and that Charlie was in fact the father of her child. According to Ella May, Fanny was also aware of this. However, it was not confirmed by the autopsy that Marie was pregnant. But it's been speculated that Charlie may have murdered his family because of this shame of getting his daughter pregnant. Marie had a boyfriend at the time of this, and his name, also Charlie, was Charlie Wade Hampton, and Mr. Hampton reported that he knew nothing of Marie being pregnant. And another theory that has been kind of put forth in this case is that the farming business had been extremely tough that year and Charlie was just struggling to support his family. It was just a financial reason more than anything else. The day before the murders, Charlie had withdrawn all of the money from the bank that the family had, which was about $60. That is equivalent to $1,000 in today's money. So if that was all the money that your family had to its name, I mean, that might cause a lot of pressure. Of note about that $60, the money was actually found in his pocket and was used to help pay for the burial of the family. 1929 was the start of the Great Depression. Charlie knew that his money problems were only going to get worse and that he had no hope of caring for his family. Kind of may have led him to commit this crime. It's been purported. It was also thought that this was a final act in an ongoing saga of domestic violence. Charlie was known by friends and family and other townspeople to have a quick temper, and it was said that it became worse with this stress of tending to his own tobacco farm and dealing with those financial pressures that I had mentioned prior. Shortly after the funerals, Charlie's brother Marion allowed visitors to tour the cabin. And Marion did this without having cleaned up any of the blood, and the cabin was still in disarray from the crime. Marie had baked a cake for her family, and in fact, that cake was left untouched under a glass cake server while people were walking through the cabin. Marion said that he did this to raise money for Arthur, remember the one surviving child, to help him pay for the farm. But the efforts were futile and Arthur lost the farm. So Arthur, the only member of the Lawson family to survive this Christmas massacre, really no other way to put it, but a Christmas attack carried out by their own father, Arthur actually died in a vehicle accident when he was 32 years old, leaving behind a wife and 4 children. Now, this crime inspired a song recorded by the Stanley brothers in the late 1950s called Story of the Lawson Family. And there have been several books written on this crime, and we used some of those for our research. The Meaning of Our Tears by Trudy Smith and White Christmas, Bloody Christmas by Bruce Jones and Trudy Smith.
So I want to discuss these theories, and it's important because as human beings, we want to know why. Why would a man do this? There has to be a reason. Sometimes the reason isn't logical to us because when a person's in that situation or a person's in that moment, their reason may be something just completely absurd, but we try to rationalize it. One of those things was the change in his personality after being struck in the head. I'm curious if people were just looking for a reason, and after the fact, they were like, oh, yeah, he did change after he had that accident with an axe. Or did it actually change his personality?
I think, the traumatic brain injury thing, we've talked about that in the past on True Crime Out Loud. And We know of several cases where people have sustained trauma to their brain that affected their behavior. I'm not sure that's the case in this particular case, because I feel like the John Hopkins examination of his brain would have shown some type of deformity or something wrong in there as a result of that trauma that might have gone to back that story up.
I think I would agree with that, especially if it's factual. I mean, I did the best I could on finding facts, but these older cases, it kind of gets convoluted. And if there was no brain injury, then, I mean, that's would be false, that it didn't cause that. If his brain was smaller than usual or a center portion was underdeveloped, that still wouldn't have happened with an accident from an axe.
No, and it sounds like, to me, what I kind of gathered from that is that it might have looked, his brain might have looked underdeveloped in an area or small in just a visual examination of it. But it seems like when they actually got it back to John Hopkins and really examined it, that whatever they saw was a visual anomaly and not something really wrong with his brain.
And then there's the theory about Marie being pregnant by her father, Charlie. Now, first of all, she told her friend that Charlie was the father, but her boyfriend was also Charlie. So that could have been a misunderstanding. Is it possible that her father had been sexually abusing her and she got pregnant? I think absolutely. But the fact that there was no autopsy report to show she was pregnant, I think that would have been a significant thing. Even in 1929, that would have been noted on the autopsy.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, you're either pregnant or you're not. They don't list in, I don't know. I would think they would list on the autopsy report that she was not pregnant or she was pregnant. So,
well, I don't think that they would list she's not pregnant, but I think if she was, they would say fetus of whatever size. But when you look at that famous Lawson family photo that was made just a few weeks before Christmas, and you look at Marie standing on that back row, she's wearing a dress, and it looks like her belly might be protruding. That dress is tight across her belly.
Yeah, I looked at the picture, and it does look kind of tight across her belly, and it's also worth noting that in the picture, she's like the only one not smiling. You know, she kind of got like an angry look on her face.
I don't know. I think the mom wasn't smiling very much, and the younger kids weren't smiling. I think back during that time, nobody smiled for pictures, because I look at some of my family's old pictures, and nobody smiles for whatever reason.
To me, just looking at the picture, to me, she looks the unhappiest in the photo. I don't know. But I don't know. That could be optical illusion or something. Just like the dress being tight, it could be how her arms are situated too. You notice that her arms are behind her, and if somebody puts their hands behind them, if their dress is a little tight already, it might pull it even tighter. I don't know. That's not enough to really say one way or the other, I don't think.
I know, but like I said, I mean, and if you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing the picture that we're looking at. It looks like there is a protruding belly.
And there could be. You know, that's a salacious thing for her friend to be saying for this time period. I don't know.
Okay, so let's just say Marie's pregnant and her dad is the one who's fathering her child. Why kill all the family except Arthur?
Because I don't know, I guess if you're sick enough to get your daughter pregnant, there's really no explaining your behavior past that. I mean, because it kind of brings, I guess, because the whole family is dishonored at that point. I mean, he obviously, if we're going with that theory that he had gotten his daughter pregnant, then he just wanted to end it all for everybody. It wasn't take her out to try to hide the fact that I got her pregnant or anything like that. I mean, it was more of a, I guess in his mind, like I said, if we're going with that theory, which we don't have a ton of evidence for, but, you know, if we're going with that theory, then maybe it's like, well, hey, that's it. I screwed it all up, so I'm going to take myself and everybody else out.
Well, but he didn't take out Arthur. And I've thought about this. Well, why would he kill everybody else? Okay, shame. There's going to be shame on him, shame on his family. If he kills Marie, then that's confirming that he was having an incestuous relationship with his daughter. and his wife is going to be there to fend for the kids, and she won't be able to fend for the kids. Financially, she can't do it. Well, if he has Arthur there, I think there's some validity to the fact. I mean, if you look at the picture, Arthur's as big as he is. Arthur's going to be able to stop his dad from doing that. Arthur also had his own gun. So I think there's some validity if the case was she was pregnant by her dad, but I don't know that we know that.
Well, yeah, but I think really you ask about leaving Arthur alive. I think regardless of Charlie's motive in it, that's the reason that Arthur's alive. He was physically imposing and really and truly, which some of these were small kids, but any one person killing that many people without meeting resistance. I mean, you got to remember, which he lured a couple of them out to the barn. That happened out by the barn, that kind of thing. But without somebody escaping or putting up any resistance, that's a lot of people for one person to kill. And he probably figured that if his eldest son was in the mix, that it wouldn't be that way. Not only would that present a bigger physical challenge for him, but it might allow the others an opportunity to escape or mount some kind of defense. I think that's the case. That's the reason Arthur survived, regardless of Charlie's motive.
I think I agree with you 100% on that. So what of these theories, what do you feel is the reason that Charlie did this?
I don't know. With such a limited amount of information, it's hard to say. I know that money was a big thing, especially right then, during that time, the Great Depression. We know that the stock market had crashed by that point, and not that Charlie was a big stock guy, probably, but the economy was tanking so hard, and banks are going to start foreclosing on homes and farms, and we saw that this was an increase in suicides during this time, and maybe this was just a suicide where he decided not to leave his family there to bear the brunt of, I don't know, financial hardship or that. I know that I'm not ready to commit fully to money, but money was a big motivation in people's suicides during this time.
I think I agree with you, but I am ready to fully commit that my theory is he had only had his own farm for 2 years, and it was not going well. He knew he wasn't going to be able to take care of his family. He knew his family couldn't survive without him, and this was the answer to everything. If he had Arthur there, he had that $1,000 in his pocket. And maybe his hope was Arthur would get that money and Arthur would be able to go on and could work as a sharecropper. But his girls and his young boys wouldn't be able to care for themselves. I think that he decided taking out his family, becoming a family annihilator, was purely financial. And you see that in a lot of situations where men kill their entire families is a financial reason because they have failed their family somehow.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that money is probably has the highest probability, or trouble with money has the highest probability of being the cause. We probably have to stop agreeing on stuff because people will quit listening.
So, but I also think that if Marie was pregnant, and here we have another child, another mouth to feed coming along, already no money. Well, he does have some money, but knowing that that's all they have for now, and it's not going to get better. And the Great Depression, like you said, that's a big thing and a big burden. Not that he knew, oh, we're in the Great Depression, but everything was going down and everybody knew. So, well,
yeah, and it went quick. When the stock market crashed, I mean, not only did that have devastating effects on the economy as far as stocks itself. I mean, remember, we've all heard the stories of people who lost their fortunes as soon as the stock market crashed and they jumped out of skyscraper windows in New York because of it. I mean, the felt impact, even though this guy's a farmer and probably not directly affected by stock prices crashing, the felt impact was swift and severe. And so if the economy just completely comes out from under us, then as we've seen since the Great Depression, farmers are hit especially hard, and they were hit especially hard in the years of the Great Depression. I mean, many farms were foreclosed on, and because if the economy collapses, that affects everything. Even if the crop itself is good, if no one's there to buy the crop because no one has any money, then it doesn't do you any good to grow it. In fact, it costs you money to grow it.
Well, my granddad passed away when I was young. I was 21. And I say that's young. To some people, that's old. But I was 21 when my grandfather passed away. And I wish I could have had some of these conversations with him, because his family originally settled in North Carolina, and they were all farmers, and they were sharecroppers. And my grandparents became farmers, and they were born in the early 1900s and lived through the Great Depression. And I really wish I could have had those conversations, that firsthand knowledge of what it was like. But it was a terrible time. So I think our agreement on this is going to end this episode.
Well, we hope everybody enjoyed this week's episode. And as always, we'll see you next week. Happy holidays, everybody. We would like to hear your thoughts on this and all of our cases. And as always, you can reach us by email at truecrimeoutloud@gmail.com, Facebook and Instagram at True Crime Out Loud. Out Loud is 2 words, not one, and Twitter at TC Out Loud.
Photos, links, and sources for this case can be found on our website at www.truecrimeoutloud.com.